Okay. Okay, so welcome to the sprint review for Comet Sprint 7. This is sort of midway through our fall work cycle, and our goals for this sprint were really around tying off loose ends on collections and workflows, as well as getting started on batch UI. And I'll say more about getting started, getting started on batch ingest and batch workflow processing. I'll say more about that at the end of this as we move towards what is next. But I want to start by just going through the demoable work that we do have for you. So first and foremost, we did get a pretty good start on the batch upload process. So the first thing that you'll see that's new is this little batch uploads button in the taskbar. So if we click on that, we get a new UI page. And here, this hasn't gone through any like real design process. But you can see that we can upload here. I'm just going to upload some nonsense because, well, yeah, let's just do like some XML nonsense. The idea here is that you'll use this form to upload a metadata manifest in a format that's supported. Right now, what we're toying with is really just CSV. I guess this field is required. Longshoe, what should I put in this field? Does it probably not matter?
The path to the files.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we're still sort of working out how we're going to make content files available to this process. So the sort of short-term thing is just path to files. Uh-oh, that didn't work. Do we know what might have went wrong, Longshoe?
You need to need the CSV file. Actually,
it needs to be CSV. Okay.
Yeah, just upload it from my the code base.
Okay, so that did actually just submit a batch. What happens on the back end when we submit a batch at this point is a little bit hand wavy. We do have some infrastructure for parsing this CSV and creating records from it, but we're not actually doing that at this point. So the next step is sort of to get this to a place where when I upload a batch, first of all, we're gonna do some level of validation of the metadata manifest to make sure that it looks like what we want. And then we're going to create a bunch of records from it. And the use case that we're targeting first and foremost is I have both metadata and files and I want to process them at once. So this is what's in for batch. Is there anything else, Longshoe, that you want to highlight on things that are merged for the batch work?
No, okay. But we have a branch there is already able to inject simple purchase and add it to workflow. That's ongoing.
Yeah, okay. So we do have active lines of work that take this further, but this is what we've got in for the sprint. Okay, so in the meanwhile, we've been working on collections, and sort of by a small miracle, when we were playing around before turning the recording on, we did manage to submit an item to a collection. So I'm going to go ahead and just show some of this we'll have already seen. So I'm going to create a collection. There are collection types. We'll probably iron out which collection types are available. And then let's say collection for Sprint 7 demo. And we can save this collection. Collections so far just have titles. We get a new collection here, and it has no items. And I'm going to go ahead and make some edits to this work. So this is the one that we have added to the test collection already. I'm going to go out on a limb and try and remove it from that collection and add it to collection for Sprint 7 demo. We found that this select to JS is a little bit fussy. I think it wants us to match whole words, or so we might refine that. But in the meanwhile, we found that we actually can discover these collections. We'll add this one, and I'm going to go ahead and save these changes and see what we get. Oh, now I've got no things in collections, Matt. That's interesting. So we've got a little bit of fussy behavior with the collection addition still. But we have made, let's try adding it just to the one. Oh, interesting. Okay, so sometimes we can add objects to collections. That's what we're learning. We were able, I think, to remove it from that collection. So there you go. We're still fighting with the collection infrastructure just a bit. But we are seeing some progress as evidenced by our ability to first of all edit works and use this form to discover collections. Oh, and there we go. That time I got a collection. I'm apparently only able to add works to a collection named test collection, Matt. Okay, so that's where we're at with collections. We did hope to be further along than that, I'll acknowledge, but I'm not terribly surprised that we're fighting a little bit with this collection stuff. It's one of the parts of the upstream hierarch system that is least well developed for the infrastructure that we're using for storage and so on. So I'm not too surprised. Another major line of work here has been that we've been having a bit of a hard time with our development environment, and that's slowed us down a fair bit for a couple of sprints now. And to address that, Alex and Thor have been working on a new dev environment using Docker Compose. And I think we're just towards the end of this sprint in a place where that's becoming the default dev environment for folks. I think a few folks have more or less transitioned completely to that environment, and a few of us are still sort of in that process. But I think we're overall feeling a lot better about the friction that's presented by our development tooling at this point. So that's a really positive change. I think it took us a couple of weeks in this work cycle to sort of decide that we needed to make that change. And then during this sprint is when that work has been carried out. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about what we're expecting to come up next in batch. And to do that, I'm just gonna go over to our workflow page. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and submit a couple of other works to be in this workflow. I'll go ahead and do a couple. So in addition to just having the possibility of creating batches of works or batches of objects that we can upload in large groups, what we really want to support is the possibility of having multiple objects within a batch go through workflow processes together. So an example use case for this is that somebody is uploading a metadata manifest and a bunch of files, and then somebody else is going to do a sort of spot check on a percentage of the objects in that batch, and then approve the metadata for the whole batch as one unit after doing that task. So the way that we have workflow set up by default is that each object is sort of in an individual state to get independently from all other objects. And if I want to move it through the workflow, then I have to do that. There's a couple of clicks required, as you can see, and I might have to like go through and submit this form for each one individually. Our next step on batch, apart from the work that Longshu made reference to, is to attach that workflow process to the batches. So if I create a batch, we're anticipating having it be possible for me to, like, somewhere in this page here, say, select that batch, perhaps by name or by some kind of batch metadata, and then move all of the objects in that batch to the next workflow step in one go. So essentially what we'd be looking at is maybe another tab here that includes my batches, and then some kind of action where I might have a sort of pop-up modal in this page that displays a form quite a bit like this. So if I wanted to do, if I wanted to approve the whole batch at once, I would just do that. I'd be able to add a comment that applies to all of those, and then move all the objects through and expect that to work in one step. So that's sort of the pattern that we're envisioning. Our immediate next step is to do some sort of sketch or wireframes for how the UI for that is going to look. And then in the meanwhile, I think we have a little bit of prep work on the back end to do to sort of make that UI possible. And that's sort of where that work is. We have 2 sprints remaining in this work cycle, and our goal is still, I think, a little bit to iron out the remaining details on collections and to iron out the remaining details on workflow, but also to really have this batch upload process where I can create these objects and then come over here and move them through a workflow done end to end. So we'd really like for whatever the campus's configured workflows are, for those to be working integrated with batch, and for it to be possible to create objects and put them in collections through that process. Our goal, again, I think we've said before, but our goal for the work cycle as a whole is for it to be possible to stand this platform up and use the batch process to migrate whole collections into the system. I think that's it for what I have. Gabriella, do you have anything that you want to say to wrap us up?
No, but I did have a question about
Sure.
I'm just registering this out of my brain into this recording so I could remember that when it comes to batch processing, are we envisioning or thinking about having the batch assignment name be automated so I don't have to remember if my next batch is going to be batch 6 or 7, that the system will be smart enough to see that we already had a 6 in there? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me that we make the batches individually identifiable. I think this is a good question because I'm not sure we've given it a ton of thought how those batches are going to look in this front end. So I think that's part of what the wireframing exercise has to be about, right? Like, what data are we going to capture? But I don't think distinguishing between the batches is necessarily going to be something that's up to the user, right? Like, certainly
users don't want to think. I don't.
To number them and capture the time of submission, so that there's differentiating data about the batches that would be captured in an automatic way.
Right.
Names probably seem good to me, but I'm also curious what people think about naming practices, right? Like, like, are names actually going to work in practice, or do they just sound good? I guess is the question that I would have.
All right. Anybody else have questions or anything? Things to share? All right, Tom, thank you for walking us through this.
Thank you. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
For another one of these.
Stay tuned.